Stand fast, Paul said, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free. Again, recognizing that true freedom, spiritual freedom, political freedom, any freedom only comes from Christ. And as God rules and reigns in the conscience and the heart of man, He gives true freedom, inward freedom, spiritual freedom. And from inward freedom, from spiritual freedom, comes real freedom. That's why it's impossible for men who are slaves in their souls to be free in their politics. That's why it is impossible for those who are the slaves of sin, who are the slaves of the despot, Satan, in their hearts and in their minds. It is impossible to them to break free the fetters of tyranny that would bind them. And that's why America is such an aberration of history. It's because in America, our founding fathers and these men that I just alluded to a moment ago, men like Pastor Jonas Clark and his brave congregation there at the Lexington Church on April 19 in 1775 were able in good conscience to take their stand for freedom and for right. Why? Because God bore witness in their souls that what they were doing was right. Without that conscience, without that lordship of Christ in their hearts, that could have never happened. And from that spiritual freedom came the freedoms that you and I hold dear today. Those freedoms that are expressed in that Declaration of Independence. Those freedoms that are codified in that Bill of Rights. But they are seated in their heart and in their soul upon that overriding principle that God governs in the hearts of men. That we do what we do as men of faith out of a good conscience. And that Caesar has no right to demand the submission of conscience. And any man that would try to do this is a despot and should be identified as such. Men who are ruled by God need no other master. The law of God, both the natural law and the revealed law of God, are all that is necessary for man to live at peace with himself, with his Creator, and with his community. For men whose hearts are ruled by God, natural law and the laws of God would all that would be necessary for us to live in peace. But to live among the society of men, many of whom have not yielded their conscience to Christ. Some freedoms are by conscience ceded to Caesar. We do this knowing what we are doing. We do this deliberately. This is done volitionally. It's not done by force. It's not done by edict or by the pen of a despot. We cede some certain liberties to Caesar in good conscience for the sake of living in a sensible society among men. Therefore, we accept in conscience the laws that Caesar, and let me just make a parenthesis right here, and I don't think I have to belabor this to this audience. I think you all understand we do not have a king in the United States. We are not a monarchy. We are a constitutional republic. Our Caesar is the Constitution of the United States of America. In 1775, though, when these events that I read about took place, they had a king. King George of England was their monarch. They gladly ceded to the king and to his troops certain freedoms and had done so for many hundreds of years in order to live at peace with their fellow man, in order to recognize the sphere of authority and influence governed by men according to the necessities of men. They ceded to the king and to his men certain liberties and freedoms. They did this willingly, volitionally. But there came a point when they could cede no more. Their conscience would not allow them to back up another step. Their conscience, ruled by the Spirit of God, would not allow them to give to their king, their Caesar, one more inch of authority. For to do so would be to surrender the authority of Christ in their hearts. And this they could not do, nor could you if you are a child of God. This history lesson demands for us the necessity of a spiritual society. Listen to me. John Adams said that our Constitution was intended for a moral and religious people only. He said it was totally inadequate to the government of any other. William Penn said that if men are not governed by God, they will be ruled by tyrants. And so it is. A spiritual society, a moral society is absolutely critically important and necessary to the preservation of freedom. Freedom cannot exist in a Bane society. Freedom cannot exist in a spirit of licentiousness and evil. Degradation and licentiousness and sin diminish freedom and increase Caesar's power. Morality and righteousness, godliness increases freedom and diminishes Caesar's power. But as degradation grows, as evil takes over society, Caesar's power is augmented, strengthened, and expanded. And the more it expands, the more it challenges a spiritual man's conscience. That's what happened on April 19, 1775. Caesar's power and authority had expanded to the point that it now was demanding the acquiescence and the surrender of the hearts and the conscience of Christian men, and they could not submit. Evil men will submit. Evil men must submit. Because the same devilish authority that rules their hearts is the same devilish authority that rules Caesar's throne. And their heart bears witness in agreement with Caesar. And they gladly submit. As did the people at Daniel's time who refused to pray at Nebuchadnezzar's order. As did the peers of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who bowed their face to the ground to the image of Nebuchadnezzar. Their hearts were ruled by the same forces that ruled the throne. And so they surrendered. But the godly man, the man in whose heart Christ is king, cannot submit to evil authority. Cannot. It is an impossibility. And that brings conflict. It demands conflict. It's inevitable. It's as predictable as the sun rising in the east. You can set your clock by it. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. Nothing can prevent it.